Okay, this route, the route that I tested out, a Dt250 and a Dt175 every Sunday. This would really test them out. I started at 190 foot above sea level. I went down almost 5, 6, 7 mile of country lanes before I reached the edge of the mountain. I won't say where it is. People probably figured it out. I know it's over 20 years ago now, but this is where I used to find out the deficiencies of every bike. A lot of people say the Dt250MX was too heavy and the Dt175MX was a better bike. No, not if you use it regular, not if you use it hard, not if you used it where you got a bunch of hairy assed North Welsh motocross lads who are just throttle happy. This route was just as fun as going on the rough, because these were country lanes. They were always slippy, there was ice everywhere in the winter, and it was very varied and bendy. Just as you reach the mountain here, it goes in a dip and climbs up a very steep precipice. Then you go over the top of this particular mountain, which is bare and windswept and pretty boring in the summer, dusty and windy, but you went down a dry riverbed here and along the edge of a valley, then climbed up into very boggy, heathery, muddy conditions. There's frequent bogs across this, right all the way to a forest. Then the firebreak road all along the forest, which you'd follow for several miles, was perpetuated with little valleys full of bogs, one coming up about there, a bend. And this would be flat out, this would be covered in mist, rainy, haily. The Dt250 was great across this sort of stuff, but it was pretty difficult to get across bogs unless you held the throttle flat out and screamed the engine. The Dt175, as soon as it dropped below that little power band it had, it was fucked. I was forever lifting it out, but you lifted it out with a lot more ease than did a Dt250. Down these big breaks down the steep mountain here, this was sort of gravel, and you could easily outpace a 175 with the Dt250 on this one. It had a lot more power. Then you go across the slate quarry, mess about with a few motocross lads, which you could outrun if you knew the track well, on hard, bumpy ground. Then you climb up a really steeper mountain than when you cross to get here, which is a trail which is now illegal. Then we didn't know, it wasn't as large back then, but I feel guilty about the damage we may have done, but you don't know as a teenage lad. This is where plenty of people come to grief, and a few got airlifted at the time. This track went on for miles and miles and had separate tracks on the top of the mountain. This was always windy and windswept. This pummeled the suspension, you screamed the engine to the limit, and every little problem would show up on these tracks up here. There's a leap at the end of these peaks. There it is, whoa, and you could land 50 foot down the mountain. Literally, it was that steep and a big drop off. Then you test the engine out, going back up these hills to climb back over the mountains again, screaming it off camber, screaming it up these gravel trails. It'd be frequently running with streams and mud, and on top of this would really make the motor detonate if you didn't have the mixture right, it wasn't jetted properly. The Dt250 would do much better on these because the suspension was a little longer. It didn't have the torque of Dt175, no matter what people say. It was great for kids or younger lads with arms like bean poles, but you needed a bigger bike to do it. I couldn't get all the DC400 even then. I tried my best. I ended up getting bigger bikes like a Can-Am 400 and an XT500. But the DT was great on journeys like this, where you were half on the road and half on the rough. But you spend many hours, you spend more time on the rough, but probably just as much distance on the road to get back to where you lived. Great to dice around these steep bendy corners and take the shortcuts, avoiding the farmers and getting through the gates quick, and getting over the flat out mountain trails back towards the original place where the trail started. A lot of forest and fire break roads here, which is straight set for the bends, but the main challenge was the mud on top of the mountain, which I always used to go back through, backtrack across, and find my way back to the original trail, because I like the challenge of the bogs. If you got through a bog in one piece, you were so pleased about it, because if your back wheel got stuck or your front wheel got stuck, you could be stuck there for ages. I've had the bike buried up to the tank, I've had the bike buried up to the handlebars, and I've had the back end stuck in so you can't even see the seat. But if you did it right, if you had the balls to keep the throttle flat out and you kept your knees tight against the tank and really give it something as much as you could leap from grass tussock to grass tussock and cross these sort of mud. Here we go, off here, going up this trail here, and it climbs back up the mountain, 495 metres, 500 metres, 520 metres, be a few bogs across here. That'd be full of running streams. It looks quite an easy track, but it's actually hilly and boggy. Climb to 550 metres, 570 metres, 580, 600 metres on top of there. Back on the fire break trail, and you start going downhill after this, up to 650 metres here. Now we're going downhill again. That's just where you hit all the bogs. You're in top gear here, flat out. You try and do 50 or 60 mile an hour, but it was just too hard to hold on. It was that bumpy. Across these forest trails here, these were very rutted, muddy and bumpy. The streams would run down here all the time. There'd be endless depths that you could end up in if you hit the wrong spot in some of these bogs, because they're just filled with water. They've been used many times by lots of other lads. And so you hit back on the road to sort of dry your wheels out, go through a few puddles, give it a wash, because you couldn't afford, there wasn't jet washes around many in them days. Go across part of this mountain, and this would go downhill now, go 478 metres, 469 metres, and you drop down to find the roads at the bottom of this pass. But this is full of bogs. If you didn't get stuck on this on the way home in the rain, in the mud and the mist, you felt like you had a successful day, because that'd be a good 4 or 5 hours riding in this, through forest back onto the trails, and you make your way back to where you lived on the road. But this really tested these sort of bikes. The XT was great, it was at home in this sort of terrain I've been through, as long as you didn't get it stuck in bog, because that was a pig. It weighed as much as a Super Dream, Honda Super Dream, 368, 400 pound I think it weighed. It had monstrous torque and monstrous power, but it was a bastard if you got stuck. The Dt250 weighed a little less, but that was pretty difficult if you got stuck. The Dt175 and the XL185 were easy to pull out, but they were shit up the hills. They just didn't have the power. You could jet them, put fresco pipe, port them, do what you wanted, but they didn't have the power, they never had the torque. So no matter what people say, the Dt250 and the XT500 were better bikes in them days, because they had the power. And if you had the balls to hold them flat out and open the throttle instead of just playing around with it, doing chip shop wheelies, you could fucking beat a Dt175 or an XL185 or a DT or a XL250, whatever they were. You could beat them, because they had that two-stroke stream. The XT had the torque. You could keep them in a constant wheelie if you're good enough, you're competent enough. Can't see much of any of the 1980 bikes brakes, because they're all pretty shit once they got wet, and they're all drum brakes anyway. It wasn't until later that decade when you get decent disc brakes and you could stop, and decent suspension. But I think the DTs were the most sought after, and they had the better suspension at the time. Monoshock was great as long as you never hit a rutted, very hard bump at flat out speed, because they had a tendency to kick the arse end up. But what a bike.